God's name has had somewhat of a checkered past, to say the least. One of the most vivid images is drawn from the 14th century when crusading was integral to the identity of the New Western world. And as religious historian Karen Armstrong writes in her work on Holy War, crusading demanded a massive psychological denial. For right up to the very end of the crusading period, nobody had ever seriously questioned the morality of these wars of extermination. Crusaders had sincerely believed that crusading was the act of the love of God. In the 15th century, Protestantism had its own aggression as these vehement protesters organized crusades of great cruelty against Catholics and nonconformists. Martin Luther fantasized that the Catholic Church was allied with Islam, forming a body of absolute evil, and was equally hostile to Jews. In the 17th century brought aggression aimed at Puritans, forcing them to flee England and sail to America, where, in the name of God, they slaughtered American Indians for their land, etc., etc., etc. There is a danger in hiding behind the name of God. A danger of shifting responsibility from our hands to those of the divine, possibly keeping our name out of it, and putting God's in between us and the other, holding God's name as a shield as we advance in battle. In God's name, get off our land. In God's name, worship as we do. We invoke the name of God or Christ in order to claim the authority that we lack on our own. My name alone does not carry the weight needed to influence outcome or to inspire fear. Authority comes with name recognition, reputation, and the respect of both allies and enemies. Leaving out "in Jesus' name" was the red flag that caused the groom's parents to question my authority. In the text read earlier, we heard of a narrow gate with a hard road leading to life, and a wide gate with an easy road leading to destruction. In the first century world, most cities had gates, both for protection and to facilitate the monitoring of who was entering and who was leaving the city. Gates enable us to choose who comes near us. And they sometimes require specific knowledge in order to pass through. But the most intimidating gates are those at which we have to answer to someone to explain our desire to enter. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven. I remember the first time my mother came to visit me in New York City, and we were on Fifth Avenue. And I suggested that we go into a store in which you had to ring a buzzer to enter. And she wouldn't go in. Or more accurately, she wouldn't ring the buzzer for fear that she wouldn't be allowed in. Not everyone who says, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, because anyone can say, "Lord, Lord," having just stepped over a homeless person in the doorway to talk into the intercom. "Lord, Lord, it's me. Buzz me up." The point being that it's absurd to address a man as Lord and teacher if you pay no attention to his teaching. The size of the narrow gate and the wide gate are not referencing the number of people who choose to enter, or the number who are allowed to enter, or with a nod to predestination, the number God knows will enter. The narrow gate is about discipline. It is about doing something hard, because Christ-likeness is not something we just decide to put on in the morning. It's hard to live a moral life. It's hard to love as Christ loved, and very hard to forgive and be generous. The plain fact is that those who even find the narrow road are few, for there are not many people who are willing to pay the price of surrendered pride and adopt a spiritual discipline. Most drift with the crowd on the broad and easy way. And it should be equally as difficult to claim our actions to be in God's name, to keep ourselves from doing and saying less than godlike things in God's name. Maybe we should say, in God's way. It makes it a little hard to say, we're declaring war in the way that God would. Or we are denying citizenship and deporting refugees in God's way. We have been given the authority to preach, pray, and work in God's name as long as it is not in name only. If our words mirror the life of Christ who commanded us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, and if our actions reflect a God who loves righteousness and justice, then we do indeed have the authority to invoke the name of God. As Marilyn Robinson says in our New Testimony, no doctrinal test exists to distinguish the true faith from the false, real Christians from posers, orthodox from the erring. But to judge the state of any soul is to presume upon a prerogative God reserves solely. We all use tests as a means of categorizing one another. Questions like, do you practice infant baptism? Do you have communion every Sunday? Do you perform gay marriages? Do you project your hymns on a large screen and pass the peace? The groom's parents were eager for me to explain why I had omitted something that in their minds was a staple Christian practice. I agree with Robinson that there are no tests, but there are indicators. The groom's parents were right to suspect that we might not theologically be on the same page. But larger indicators, such as my homily, the prayers, the service I had written for their children, speak volumes about my belief system. Let's not be thrown by the absence or inclusion of magic words, for they may get us through the narrow gate, but only practice and careful stepping will advance us down the road.